Melissa, do you think you have multiple personalities? Would you say there's like different versions of you?
Not in any kind of like clinical diagnosable problem, but I definitely think I have different versions of myself when I play poker for sure.
What are those versions? What are the differences between them?
Well, I think I have from a skill level, I think I definitely have days when I'm playing what I would consider like my A game, where I'm making the right decisions. My mental game is balanced. I'm thinking logically through situations. I'm not allowing my thought process to become distorted unnecessarily. And then I have days where I kind of would lump in as kind of my B to C games, where I think these are kind of more common. Maybe B to C plus is probably the most common version of myself at the table, which is a series of maybe some small mistakes, some successful plays, some clear thinking, but then also maybe the occasional blunder thrown in. And then I think at the bottom is my D to F game, which fortunately I think is rare, but still possible, where something happens and I'm unable to think clearly. I'm doing things that I'm aware in the moment are wrong, objectively wrong, theoretically wrong. I'm deviating in ways that are completely based in my own interpretation, my own kind of warped interpretation of what's going on at the table and not any kind of rational interpretation of what's happening. So I think to answer your question, yes, there are different versions of myself. Now, sometimes I can switch to different versions within the same session. So I've had sessions that start off with as like a B or C, dip down into D, and then move up into A, really. And that I would say, because the differences between each version is so stark, I can't like say like collectively that was a B plus session because there's such stark differences. So yeah, I would say that there's definitely different versions of myself that I bring to the table.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would agree. I'm the same. And I agree also that you can switch between these at the drop of a hat. Like in the middle of a session, one thing can happen that can just sort of like gently take you out of one frame of mind and into another. So I wondered if today we could discuss this in a bit more detail. What are the traits or skills or attributes that we can bring with us into poker that we maybe learned in real life? Maybe we didn't learn them, they're just innate to us. Maybe we just are born with a certain type of personality that makes us better suited to the game or not so well suited to the game. But why don't we discuss today what are the actual factors, the attributes that define the A game personality, the F game personality, and how do we maybe get better at them in life? Maybe they can be virtues, maybe they can be things that really help our character, and then transfer that into the poker version of ourselves. So why don't we start with the idea of A game? Let's just sort of frame this pinnacle of the best that I can possibly do, the best frame of mind that I can be in that leads to the best framework for decision making and EV maximization. That is my A game. That whole set of mechanics is my A game. Now, what traits would you say the version of you who plays her A game has? What are the main things that stand out?
The first thing that comes up to mind immediately is patience. And patience, not just in the sense of being able to kind of patiently wait for the right spots, patiently wait for cards, endure what may be a long run of not getting playable hands. I play live. I solely play live. So, the amount of hands that I'm seeing in an hour, there's not many. I would say if I had to guess on an average, it was maybe three. So I think having the patience to not only wait for the right spots, but also to be able to kind of zoom out and say, this is one session in a whole poker lifetime of sessions, and that what is happening now is not what's going to happen forever. And having the patience to not only wait for the right spots, but also to not feel kind of desperate to win a pot or not feel a certain attachment to pots. So being able to fold in those spots where I feel an entitlement to the chips in the pot. And maybe this is a different skill than patience, but I put it under the patience umbrella because I think it's not just patience of action, but it's patience of mind. And the patience of mind, when I'm playing my A game, says to me, this is clearly a fold. You may have worked really hard to get to this river spot. You may have done all the right things, you may have played this objectively correctly, but you know that this river card just basically destroyed all the work you've done. So this kind of castle that you've built has now just been blown up. That's okay. And there's no reason to make this worse when you know this is a fold, and there will be other pots, there will be other hands, and not to have this feeling of like, this is the last hand of poker I will ever play, and I can't afford to lose. And it sounds really silly to talk about it now, but in the moment, in the session, at least for me personally, a real leak in my mental game, which I've worked on a lot and I'm always constantly working on, is the patience to kind of not exhibit that kind of desperation, to quiet that voice that says you need to get even, or you need to drag some chips because it's been too long. You've been sitting here for too long and you haven't won a pot, and you're watching all of these other players at the table drag chips and win pot after pot and get lucky after lucky. And it's just not fair, and it's time for you to kind of be the right force of justice in the world and win this pot. All of this is completely ridiculous, irrational thinking, but in the moment it can feel like totally correct. So quality one of the A game is patience of thought and patience of action.
Yeah, and like being able to assume the responsibility that poker's asking of you in that moment, in that session, rather than always trying to have your way as you would like it to be in a perfect universe. I think I struggle with this a ton. I struggle with this in life, in poker, this idea of accepting a state of affairs and then making that your starting point and then acting from there. Like I had a conversation with a student this morning where we were talking about his reluctance to accept that pocket queens that he just cold 4-bet against he'd squeezed against the fish, and the fish had called. It was like a big squeeze, so you've got like quite a low SBR already pre-flop, and then like the flop comes out ace 6-4 two-tone, he c-bets the third pot and the fish raises like 4x, and this is like a fortune reversal moment, right, where all of the EV that you had up until this point, like pre-flop, it was super high, you had queens against the fish, you was stoked, like your EV is massive, you're going to win a big pot really often. Then an ace comes on the flop and it gets decimated, but you're still entitled to maybe like 50% of the pot or something like that. You're still like, okay. Then you c-bet and nothing changes, but then the fish raises and suddenly your EV is like close to zero somewhere. Maybe it's slightly winning, maybe it's slightly losing, depending on the player, but it's close to zero. And being able to accept that fall from grace, that fortune reversal, being able to say, hey, last week I had 2 legs, but then I had this accident and I cut off my leg with the head trimmers. This was the analogy we used in coaching, right? We said we weren't going to be dark today, god damn it. There we go. It wouldn't be Poker Distilled without morbid curiosity. So you wake up with one leg in the hospital, and I said to the student, well, what would you do? What's the optimal way to go here? Do you A, accept the new status quo and the fortune reversal that you used to be a person with 2 legs and now you're a person with 1? Or do you fight against that and make up reasons why you still have 2 legs and still act as if you still have 2 legs? Like, which one is going to be the easier path for you and everyone around you? And we agreed unanimously that the first option is much better, to accept where you now are. And I think this is more than just patience. I think like there is a patience to being able to say, this isn't my pot, or that I'm allowed to fold here. I don't have to win this pot. There's a sort of abstinence that's sort of calm, meditative abstinence there that's really important and is linked to patience. I also think there's a certain amount of humility required, being able to accept where you are and what's happened to you, and that is not expedient to do that, right? It's not at all easy or natural to say, shit, my EV is now 0 and I'm going to accept that. What's easy, going back to bravery / cowardice, it's cowardly and easy and expedient to say, oh, I'm going to continue with queens because he could be bluffing and blah, 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 and I'm going to hang on to my queens and not let go of that really heavy thing that's like a big part of me. It's like you need to let go of someone in your life that's like a parasite and is like draining you and like ruining your life, but it's easy to just let them keep doing that, right? But like if you can cast them away, you can free yourself and become like a better version of yourself. So it's like, can we cast away these desires in these fortune reversal spots? So this fortune reversal, you're at a crossroads and you have the chance to either just say, I need to calibrate myself to the situation I'm now in and handle that, and have the humility to say, I am in a bad situation. Where do I go from here? If you imagine like an addict, if they're going to recover, they almost have to accept they're at rock bottom. I am like my life is a sham. My life is a mess. I'm in this really bad situation. Where do I go from here? Okay, I need help. Okay, I need to take X and Y steps, even if that involves saying that I have a massive problem, When you have queens, if you can't accept that you have a massive problem, you're never going to be able to overcome that.
That's a really good point, and there's a lot there. And I think that one of the things that I think happens a lot in life and perhaps everyone can relate to, which is related to that issue in poker, which is, seeing reality for what it is and reacting accordingly and not feeling entitled to things and not acting as if what is happening isn't really happening. I think that a lot of times outside of poker, we don't react to reality itself or react to our interpretation of reality. So an event happens that maybe is unexpected. An extreme example would be like, you lose your job, or maybe a relationship ends or something like that. Yes, on the surface, there's a lot of things that are terrible about that. I mean, for the loss of a job, you've lost your source of income. For the loss of relationship, I mean, you're no longer in a relationship. All of these things are apparent. But one of the things that I like about kind of Stoic philosophy, and I know like Stoicism is very much in vogue right now, and like it's become it's really popular, and I think it's like the philosophy of Instagram in a lot of ways. And I think there's a lot of it that's been cheapened and misinterpreted, but I think ultimately like the root of it is pretty good and pretty important, which is like, we don't know truly what an event means for us at the time it happens. So yes, objectively losing your job is bad. You're no longer going to have a source of income, but it is possible that you will get another job to which you are better suited, or that you enjoy more, and that will bring you to new areas of your life and, make you happier than you were before. And so why would you react with fear and anxiety and loathing and anger if you knew that 6 months from now you would be in a better place? The skills that, maybe someone who's, in life, I think, who maybe has gone through a lot of difficulty and has learned these skills. This is something that kind of happened to me. I didn't lose my job, but I encountered some difficulty in my personal life that required me to kind of step back for a second and say, okay, my initial interpretation to this is anger and fear and anxiety, but why is that my reaction to it? Should that be my reaction to it? Or should my reaction be more measured, calm? Should I take a step back? And in that moment, I was aware of being able to do that, and it did help. And the reality is you don't know where you're going to be in the future, and you don't know where this event is leading you. So I think bringing that skill to poker and using that in an A game session would be something like, I have queens against a fish. I see an ace on the flop. This sucks, but I don't know where this will lead me. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know what skill, by folding here when I know I'm behind and I know it's the right thing to do, that in the immediate moment will not bring me this pot. But what will it do? Well, it will allow me to look back on this decision as a positive things. It will teach me this skill of, folding in these tough spots, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things that I will benefit from, which are not monetary, they're not measured in chips, but there's a lot of value to that. And with poker, you don't, you never know what your next hand is going to be, which is, the other piece of it. So I think keeping in mind this idea of not being a slave to your interpretation of events is really important.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've struggled with it loads in my life, where something happens and my initial reaction is tantrum. Maybe not like in the flailing 2-year-old sense where I'm like literally throwing stuff across the room and screaming, but certainly like some inner version of that. And when I first started playing poker, I think a lot of the stuff from my childhood, which was, I don't know how much I've told you about my childhood, but it was a bit rocky because I had a parents split up when I was quite young, and I had 2 different lives. Like it was 1 week at my mum's, 1 week at my dad's, and they were very opposite environments. And I probably told you this, but when I was at my dad's, I was kind of like the free reign child. I was an only child there. I have a half sister on my mother's side of the family, but not at my dad's. So I was like able to do whatever I wanted. He was very lenient. He kind of felt bad about the whole situation and wanted to spoil me and just make sure that I was kind of never in harsh trouble and could always do what I wanted. And I got my way. And I did learn some other skills with my mum and stuff. I had to be more of an adult at a very early age. I had to like look after that side of the family sometimes because there were various problems there. And that was quite difficult. But then I grew up with these 2 sides of me, like on the one hand, always being like ready to act and to sort of intervene and protect people and protect myself and do the right thing, like on high alert. But on the other hand, very much like expecting to get my own way when I wasn't in crisis mode. So when I was playing poker, when I first got into the game, this part of me that was used to this, like getting my own way, just getting what I wanted, would not accept that at all when it became apparent that I should fold. And my biggest leak by far when I played full time and when I was just getting into the game and didn't know whether I would even make anything of myself in poker was actually learning to fold and learning to say the world is as it is and you can't do anything about that. And it took like a ton of like motivational, almost tellings off, being told off by strong, respected poker players at the time, like, why are you doing this? Before I was like, wow, that's like someone actually like laying down the rules for me. Like that's someone I really respect laying down the rules for me. And you were saying before we started recording, Melissa, that poker is this lone wolf pursuit in many ways. You don't have, Nick at Airball has that guy that sits next to him at the table and is in the bathroom with him, like hugging him all the time and stuff, like between hands and giving him moral support. But I don't have someone like that. I didn't have someone like that when I played, and you probably don't have bathroom breaks every 40 minutes to get pep talks when you're playing in your local game, I would imagine. That has to come from you then, that accountability to keep we talked in coaching about your inner child and like what she wanted and refusing to accept reality and getting in with ace king or whatever when she shouldn't, and how to keep that at bay. But that has to come from you. And that's what I learned as well, is that, hold on a minute here, I don't have an inner parent that's disciplinarian enough to keep me in line or is strong enough to do that or even has the will to do that. I don't have that. So I had to craft that for myself, and that was really difficult. And it still doesn't always work. Like the child is still just like, fuck you some days, and just like there's no controlling him some days. How did you go about cultivating that part of yourself then? Because I believe that your A game self, there's a certain amount of self-parenting involved in that, right? Like policing the F game child to some extent. So how do we find the ability to do that if we feel like we just can't control ourselves? Because a lot of people in poker probably just feel like they can't stop themselves making these impulsive decisions or reality rejecting views on things. So what have you done so far?
I'm not an alcoholic, but I do have some friends that are. And one of the things that they say are like, I've quit drinking, I have it under control, but I'll always be an alcoholic. So for the rest of my life, I will be an alcoholic. You never like move out of that category. You never stop becoming an alcoholic. And the reason they say that, to the best of my understanding, and again, I don't know this process, but to my understanding, the reason you say that is because you have to constantly remind yourself mentally that you have this issue, that this issue will never fully go away, that it's a disease, it's a mental disease that you're particularly wired for and that you're susceptible to, and that you may be totally comfortable going to bars with friends and drinking club soda. You may be totally comfortable going to parties and being around people that are stumble down drunk, and you may be fine doing that. Maybe you're not, but you may be. But in the back of your head, you're always aware that if I were to have a drink, if I were to, forget this part of myself, that could be disaster and it could ruin everything. So I treat my leak, my mental game link that you just talked about, which is this kind of spoiled, desperate, panicking inner child, as almost like alcoholism. So I think of it as like, I have this, I always will have this. There's some days where it's much easier to control than others, but it's a part of me. It's not something that I'm trying to rid myself of, or that I feel like if I just do enough meditation and I just do enough breathing exercise and I just watch enough inspirational videos on Instagram, I will be cured of. Like, no, that's fake and that's stupid. Just like someone who has, truly struggled with alcoholism or any kind of addiction. I mean, I think I'm just using alcoholism as an example because I understand that because I have friends that are struggling with that. But if you talk to someone that has like truly struggled with these demons, like the way they talk about it is, this is something that will always be with me. It's the monkey on my back, right? That's the kind of cliche. And so when I sit down to play a session and I feel myself, I feel this kind of inner child starting to kind of demand things, getting desperate, causing my thought process to become clouded with really immature thoughts of, desperation and panicking and jealousy. Jealousy is another part of it, which is this emotion that I feel when I see players that I feel are objectively worse than me winning pots. Or, the other night, I was stuck. It was kind of a a difficult session. And, I just saw this player sit down who I play with a lot. And, he's kind of a old man coffee type. And he sat there and like hit a straight and then hit a flush, and two hands had, made 3 or 4 buy-ins and then got up and left. And it was like the easiest thing in the world for him. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, F that guy, like, what's going on here? Why can't that be me? But in the moment, I had to stop myself and say, that's the spoiled child. That's the alcoholism. That's the disease coming forward. And then once you identify it, and once you're able to kind of quiet it and be in control of it, for me at least, it becomes easier, because if you can't identify the problem, then it feels overwhelming. And so for me, bringing the version of myself to the table that allows me to play my A game, an enormous part of that is being aware that, just like someone who maybe goes to a bar with friends as an alcoholic says, okay, well, here's my friends and they're all having a really good time throwing back shots and drinking a bunch of beers and everything. And it'd be really fun to actually be at that level with them, because it seems so harmless and so easy. And wouldn't it be nice to just be able to do that? But I can't, because I have this problem.
Yeah. Wow. Were you aware of this person within you, this like spoiled child, as you put it, before you played poker? Or did poker like introduce you to her for the first time?
I think I've always been prone to anxiety and kind of what I would call like panic spiraling. I'm not like, I wouldn't call myself like, I don't have panic attacks or anything like that, but I do tend to, at least when I was younger, be much more motivated by a fear of failure than I was by any kind of wanting to achieve success. So it was like, if there's like, 2 polar extremes, on one side is success, the other side's total failure, I always felt like I was closer to the failure side than I was to the success side. In some ways, I still feel like that.
It's chasing you at all times. It's like a shadow that's like following you around.
Yeah. I've always felt like I'm never that far away from like kind of utter ruin, which is both good and bad. And I think that the good side of that is that I think it motivates me and has been a driver in my personal and professional life in ways that I think has kind of helped me enormously and makes me a very like motivated and conscientious person. But the bad side of that is that it also, I'm prone to kind of overthinking situations. I wildly misinterpret things a lot. A lot of times we've talked about this before, but I'm reacting to a narrative and not necessarily reality. And so I think before I started playing poker, I was certainly prone to this kind of spiral of like, one bad thing happens and another thing, and then another thing. And then before I know it, I'm worried about something that's not even reality. That definitely was with me prior to poker. When I started playing poker, it kind of seamlessly transitioned to poker, because here I was putting myself into high stress situation, being faced with a constant reward and failure system, a kind of an alien world, as you've kind of coined the sense where like I didn't, down is up and up is down, and you can work really hard but still not see the fruits of that be returned to you. And so I think it was a very natural, fertile environment for the worst aspects of this kind of panicked inner child to kind of come out. And so I definitely think it supercharged her in a bit, but she was definitely there prior to poker.
Yeah, and when we think about like, again, the attributes of the A game and what we can take from self-development and working on our real lives into poker, I think the confidence that everything is okay, like the security. So it sounds to me like you're like me and that you're quite a high alert person, and like within the tribe you'd probably be more a sentry or someone that was like, did you see that like lying over there, than someone who's just like relying on other people to do that for them. So if you imagine that everyone has like a role within the tribe, and I think I'm really like that as well. And what that means is that can interfere in your poker game in so many different ways. Like if you feel like possibly insecure, like I must win this pot, or bad things, or if I don't beat this person to this pot, they've outplayed me, or if they bluff me, that's unacceptable, I have to call in case they're bluffing. These are all like feeling threatened. They're like not feeling okay. When can we fold? Well, either when we are afraid, but we have significant bravery to still fold, right? We're afraid of folding the best hand, but we still have the sufficient bravery to overcome that fear. Or when we're just completely at peace with folding the best hand, we're not afraid of it, and therefore we don't need any bravery. I think of bravery, harking back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is like this thing that combats fear. It's necessary to combat fear, and almost like the way that chaos and order are linked. Without fear, there's no need for bravery, because you don't need to be brave to do something that's not scary. So where's this all going? Well, I imagine myself at the poker table and I'm thinking, when I'm playing my absolute A game is when I'm not afraid of anything. I can fearlessly bluff someone. I can fearlessly bluff catch someone if I think it's right. I've got the intuition and I've got the conviction to act on said intuition if I want to. But I also have like the balls to fold if I feel like this is a spot where I need to make a big fold. And back in the day, I used to be in that zone a lot when I played poker a lot, and I would be in that zone frequently. These days, it takes a bit of immersion to get me into it. I need to be playing for a while. I need to be, usually when I run good, when I play well and run good and win money, I go into that zone very quickly because the process of running good makes me feel at ease. I'm very much a glass cannon. I'm like a snowball that gathers momentum, but when it hits something and stops, it just falls apart. It's a bit like that. So I think another A game quality is really this ability not to be on high alert, not to be scared shitless or afraid or being in sentry mode, and actually being like immersed in the game. Because one of the biggest traits for me that constitutes a game is immersion. And immersion is something that when I think back to my youth, I struggled with a ton. There was a reason I used to drink a lot. I wouldn't go as far as to say alcoholic, but certainly like the culture in the UK when I was growing up in like the early mid noughties and stuff like that, when I like turned drinking age, was to drink. It was a lot of like drinking. And I think that creates a kind of immersion because it gives you a sort of myopia where you feel immersed in whatever you're doing, like a lot more. And I think I relied on that a lot of the time. And I remember when I like started hitting like real adulthood, you know, and like had to sort my life out and like actually get a direction. I started building this business and stuff. And I remember finding it really hard to be immersed in things. I've told you about this before, how I'd get an idea in my head. It would just distract me. It would just pull me away. And when I think back to like poker, one reason I loved poker back in the day, I still love it. I still love the game, but I loved playing it back in the day much more than I do now, is that I was able to find that immersion in poker sometimes where I could play this A game and I could be in this flow state where, in the words of TJ Cloutier, he said this in an ancient old book that's probably a terrible book strategically by today's standards, but he said, if a wing fell off a gnat at the end of the table, I would notice it. And he was talking about being in his A game. And back then, of course, no one even knew it was like optional to raise a flush draw against a C bet. So how the hell are we to go off anything other than wings falling off gnats or the human equivalent of your opponent blinking one too many times when they're bluffing or whatever it may be? Stuff that today we would say is hocus pocus, but is it really? So back in the day, I would get some really sick reads on people by looking at them. I would have a really amazing sense of what people were doing and where they were in their range. And this was all through playing live poker. And live poker still puts me in that place sometimes, and it's a really wonderful feeling. That's what I love about playing live. Online, you can get into a sort of pseudo immersion state, but because you can't see everything, you can't be immersed like a human is immersed in a tribal situation. It's harder to let your subconscious sort of do what it wants to do there. Online, it's definitely like an alien world. It's a more alien world than live poker, actually, by far. So I wonder if this immersion in this flow state is actually like a hugely important part of a game. Like the decisions coming to you easily, thick and fast and intuitively, but in a way where you trust the intuition. It's not just desire based. It's not reaching or grasping at something or pulling you in any direction. It's just telling you what's up. And I wonder if immersion is like a massive part of a game, and it's something we could try and cultivate more.
That's a good question. Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with your, the A game quality of like, if you're running good, it's easier to get into that kind of flow state. But I think playing live, that flow state can happen without you being, sitting there with like headphones on and being like totally immersed. You can be holding conversation. You could be, being kind of social at the table and still notice that wing that falls off the gnat, right? So like the flow state is not necessarily like what you would think of as like a flow state online where you're just like totally focused. And I've gotten to that flow state in other areas of my life. Like I used to write quite a lot, and like a good writing day for me, I would get into that flow state. I would start at 8:30 in the morning and I would look at the clock and it would be 4:00. And I'd be like, where'd the day go?
Wow.
Because I was just so into what I was writing. And at the time I was writing fiction and like just so into the story that I was writing and the characters. And it was just like, it was a wonderful feeling. It didn't happen a lot. A lot of times it was much harder to write every day. But when it did happen, it was absolutely splendid. I've also achieved that with poker study, where there's a great book called I think it's called Deep Work. It's either deep study or deep work, but it came out a couple years ago, and it's about this flow state and how we can, more readily access that in our work, and, getting away from these distractions, social media, our phones, things like that. I actually got into this flow state last weekend when I was studying just some sims that I had been running through a solver, and I played against the solution for like a couple hours, and it was awesome. And it's like I wasn't even here. I was listening to music, but I wasn't even hearing the music. And the reason I realized that is because I got to the end of this playlist and I was like, oh, this song's awful. Like, why am I still listening to this? But I didn't even know at the time because I was like so focused. And that's wonderful. Like, that's what it's all about. So I think that's certainly a part of the A game, but I think it looks different in the live poker space than it does maybe when you're by yourself, because I will add to your statement about your A game quality is that when you're in a live game, you're able to communicate with people, and at least for me, like, become interested in necessarily what other people are saying. So like if I'm having a B to C to even a D or F game, like I could care less what anyone says to me. I could care less what people are talking about. I usually listen to music. I stop caring about my, this kind of table of it. Like I don't care about like looking like a kind of stuck reg. I'm just like, whatever, like I don't care. But when I'm in the A game, I'm much more engaged in what's happening at the table, and not to the point where I'm just like talking endlessly, but I'm certainly more willing to listen to what people are saying to me. And I think that's another part of it. One thing I wanted to talk about too is that this is earlier what you were saying about like being able to accept when you're in your A game, being able to accept the outcome of whatever's happening and not feel tilted or triggered by anything. I think a good example of this is, are you in a spot where you can fold a pocket pair, whether it's pre-flop for whatever reason or on the flop, and then see your set card come out after you folded and feel nothing?
That's a really good litmus test. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good litmus test, because there's days where I've had to fold pocket pairs pre and gotten to the point where I'm like, I can't even bear to see this flop come out.
Yeah.
So I've got to look away, going to look at my phone. I'm going to leave the table because this is such a gross spot. I can't believe this. Or like, something like on the flop or the turn, coming out and just feeling like I'm ready to just like puke because I would have won so much if I was in the hand. That's a good litmus test.
Definitely. Yeah. That's really interesting. The whole part about like social interaction is so true. Like when I'm firing on all cylinders, I think that's another reason why I hark back to this, like when I was a young adult and I discovered drinking, and it put me in this frame of mind where I was able to like engage with people on this like supernatural, not supernatural as in like ghostly or anything like that, but like there was this real, so natural that it was beyond natural. It was too natural to even be aware of, like kind of immersion of like talking to people and being able to like chat to a girl or something that I wouldn't normally have been able to do, like, or would have felt nervous, or being able to like speak to people on the edge of my friendship circle. And just like, I think like that period of my life, it always stands out to me, and that like a drug that's actually bad, like in absolute terms. Like I think alcohol is like a really bad thing in absolute terms, and like I've got experience with like knowing alcoholics and stuff that I'll talk about at some point, I'm sure, on one of these podcasts as well, just like you do. And I've seen the dangers of it for sure, and I kind of hate it these days. I hate like drinking and hangovers and all of that, but it definitely unlocked this part of me that I couldn't really unlock any other way. There's a few other ways I've unlocked it like over my life. One is poker, like I've said. One is like writing songs on guitar or writing fiction, like you've talked about, things like that too. These days I really feel like with all the amount of content I have to create, and like worrying about recording and pausing and checking lines and solvers and all of this sort of thing, as well as just the general checking of our phones and being distracted constantly, I feel like it's so hard to get into that state. And I actually like had a little, like, I'm really happy for you, Melissa, but I had a little pinch of envy when you said you were in that state recently, because my brain was like, what? Is that still possible? Does that state still exist for people in 2023? Because I do think it exists a lot less than it did 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10. And maybe this has inspired me to make a conscious effort to be in flow state over something. And maybe that means closing down absolutely everything else, putting the right sort of music on. Maybe when I play a game of TFT, Teamfight Tactics, tonight, or whenever I play, it's like my sort of hobby at the moment. I really love that game. Maybe I'll close everything else and I'll just try and get fully into it. Maybe the next time I write something or record a video, I'll try and get into flow state. And maybe the next time I play poker, I'll try to do it, because I think that flow state has just like been so missing in so many aspects of my life, and I really want to get more of it. And I think like the audience listening to this right now will probably be like, holy shit, flow state doesn't happen to me as much as it used to, because I really think technology has invaded. I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a kind of political philosopher of the 20th century, 19th, 20th century, who used to say that technology was an evil because it actually distracted us from the political good, and like that government wanted us to, and I wouldn't go this far myself, but it was like along the lines of like government wants us to get invested in commodities, and this is one of the evils of capitalism. And I actually love capitalism myself, so I'm not of this opinion. But one of the problems of capitalism for sure is that we do become dependent on certain technologies that take us out of the moment and stop us focusing on anything that we could achieve if we were in a flow state. And poker is no exception to that. So yeah, so far we've got flow state, we've got the sort of patience and the ability to accept fortune reversal. Just as we're getting on a bit here time-wise, is there anything else that you think constitutes like the attributes of the A game player for you?
Yeah, I would say like the last thing would be kind of a reminder to myself and an embracing of like being abnormal. When I say like abnormal, I mean like consciously acting in a way that I would think a normal poker player would react. So in other words, like we've talked about this before, but you know, one of the little mental exercises I do is like if I'm in a tough spot or if I'm experiencing something that would maybe be tilting, I would say, you know, there's all these other poker players out there and that this would tilt them, but I'm not going to get tilted here. I'm better at this than all this other, you know, these hypothetical players. And so probably don't need to go too much into it, but I wanted to mention it just because we've talked about it before, but I wanted to mention it because I do think that's an important part of my A game is like this embracing of like, no, I'm going to be better than the normal generic tilting player here. I'm going to be the exception to the rule. And I think that's embracing that and conquering that and is a really important part of the A game too.
Yeah. Like last summer, around the time the CPS came out, like I went through it was a difficult time, not because I like was having inner difficulties, but just because like life was being a bit of a bitch to me. Like my mum was really ill, like she nearly died. She was in hospital, had this surgery that was like really touch and go and all of this. And I was dealing with that on top of like all the stresses of life and trying to get the Carrot Poker School released and stuff like that. And I remember saying to my therapist at the time, like, this is all like really bad. And he was like, right, this is a really bad external situation that you have found yourself in through no fault of your own. You've just ended up in this situation, right? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how would you say you're handling it? And I was like, well, given the circumstances, like an 8 or 9 out of 10, to be totally honest with you. I think I've handled it excellently. I've suffered a bit, but I've not started like smoking 20 cigarettes a day or doing drugs or drinking or being horrible to my loved ones or doing anything self-destructive. I've still like I've ran my business really well. I've been there for my mother. I've done all of these things as well as I possibly could have. But that doesn't feel good, right? In that moment, you're not going to be like, wow, I'm so good at this. Wow, another day of me nailing the fact that my mum's really ill. I'm so fucking good at my mum being really ill. Like, you're not going to do that. So when the session is going badly for you at poker, you're not going to sit there and be like, man, I'm fucking nailing this. I'm so good at running like shit. Like, I've lost 4 buy-ins and I'm not even that mad. I don't even want to, like, play this 8-7 suited, like, in the hijack. Like, I don't want to. I'm amazing. Truly, I'm the best. You're not going to do that. And because there's no immediate reward, you don't get gratification. And one of my big wiring problems has always been the fact that I was a massive hedonist, right? It's a huge problem to be a massive hedonist. A huge, huge problem. Because it means that you need quick dopamine rewards to everything when you're a hedonist. You actually rely on it to be able to see that something is good. It has to bring you quantifiable pleasure or minimize pain in a quantifiable way in the short term in order to be acceptable as a course of action. And when you're running bad at poker, only thing that can do that is tilt. So the appeal of tilt, the lure of tilt might just work out for you. It's terrible EV-wise, and it will probably make your problems much worse, but it's the only thing that can reverse the shit that's going on. So when you're 3 buy-ins down, and you can make a really bad call, and if you're right, like I'll give you the example of the time this worked for me. I actually ran good with my egoistic hedonism for a while, and then I didn't run good anymore, and it was really bad. But when I ran good, it was good. Because I remember one night, many, many moons ago, being in the casino after the nightclub with my friend, my good friend, and I went there, like every time we went clubbing, we'd go to the casino afterwards usually. and I'm playing blackjack. I don't have a lot of money at this point in time. Like, I've lost like £300 and I only have like £600 in my bank account. I'm like, I don't know how old I am, like early 20s. I'm skint. So I get the last £300 and I put it on the blackjack box all at once. And my mate's like, what are you doing? Because I've literally just gone to the cash machine, taken this money, put it on the fucking box. And it's a lot of money to me at this point in time. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, shut up. Drunk as fuck, myopically focused on the table in front of me. Jack, dealer gets a 10. 6. 16. Do you know what the right play is with 16 against a 10, Melissa?
Probably to not get any more cards. What do they call that? Stay pat or something?
It's actually to hit. Most people think it's to stay pat. Okay. It's very, very close. It's balanced on a knife edge, but it's actually to hit. It's to take a card. So I know, because I'm a poker player, not a very good one at this point, maybe like not quite got my career off the ground yet, but I like poker at this point. And I'm like, I'm going to take a fucking card because that's the right play. 5, 21, double nice. Up. And then I like one more and then went home up money. And I was rewarded. But I knew that when I was down 300 and drunk and upset, the only thing I could possibly do to salvage my night and my feeling was to put the other 300 on blackjack. So if your goal is to get immediate gratification and end pain immediately at all costs and to give yourself a chance of doing that, you have to put the other 300 quid on the blackjack box. There's no other option. Fast forward to like being a professional poker player, like, or one day in the future, or you playing, this weekend and trying to build your bankroll and grind out your local card room or whatever, you'll feel that pull. And I think that pull is in some sense hedonistic, right? This pull of like, I desire this to be otherwise. That's a very hedonistic pull. And once we reach a point where we stop doing the automatically short-term gratifying thing, because it doesn't actually work long-term, and we accept adversity and we accept that the best we can do is maybe quit the session and walk out of there 3 buy-ins down, because that's better than playing on in the state we're in. Maybe we can avoid being in that state and we can play on and play relatively well. But we have to fold queens after being down 3 buy-ins? Like, really? I have to fold queens after just enduring all of that shit? Well, you don't have to. That's the problem. And the tilt lures you because it's the hedonistic end. And we all have that part of us. So I would posit to you that maybe another aspect of the really good A-game poker player is that they are not tempted by hedonistic gratification. They're actually willing to do, as Peterson would say, do the thing that's meaningful and not the thing that's expedient, which is all of the rules for life are like incredibly profound, and they all make a lot of sense just in my own teaching with my students and in coaching sessions. But that one in particular recently, I've been thinking about it more and more, and I think like I would have played my A game a lot more back in the day if I hadn't been wired deeply to be hedonistic about life. So I wonder if that's also part of it.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that those spots where you're faced with those decisions where it's like, if this goes right, this turns into a winning session. If this goes wrong, not stuck 3 buy-ins, I'm stuck 6 buy-ins or something like that. It's an extreme example, but that's extremely difficult. And I've had sessions recently where I felt like I have gotten into those spots where it's just like, you're just going to get punished and you're just going to be, it's like there's some force that's requiring you to be the best person you can be.
Yep.
And yes, the answer, I mean, the easy thing to do is to be hedonistic, is to, get your money in the pot, say it is what it is. This is the kind of knife's edge that I want to, this is me living on the wire. This is kind of what I'm going to do. And that is an option. But the other option is this invisible force calling you to be a version of yourself that you never knew you could achieve? And that also, if you can recognize it, should also be really tempting. So like, yes, there's the hedonistic choice, but then there's this other choice that's maybe unclear at the time and seems like it's going to require more suffering and more pain and more difficulty, but that can lead to you accessing a version of yourself that you never knew was possible. And to the extent that poker gives us those opportunities, and sometimes it gives us those opportunities so starkly and so bluntly, is phenomenal. And like, we're lucky to be alive and playing this game simply because it gives us those opportunities. I mean, I think, other areas of life, other pursuits that people do, obviously give them those opportunities too. But I'd be hard pressed to think of a kind of pursuit that gives it to you in such stark terms, where you can say to yourself, here's this fork in the road where I could take either route. And one route is me putting more money into the pot. We'll call it, the hedonistic route, as you've explained. And I don't know how that's going to end up. It could end up with me winning more money. It could end with me more stuck. But the other route is more mysterious. It's more difficult. I don't know where it's going to lead, but it could lead to something phenomenal. I think that is a really exciting place to be. And I know in the moment it can feel awful and you're just like, why am I in this gross spot? This sucks, blah, blah, blah. But another way of looking at it is this is another opportunity. This is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. And I know this sounds really, new agey or whatever, or it's like, it's very, very difficult to access this, but I think it's possible and I think it's worth it. And I think that if you when you're playing in your A game, I think you can access this and I think it's achievable. And I know because I have. And I was telling you before we started talking today that I had a session last weekend where, because of a number of things that are going on, both like in my personal life outside of poker, but also in poker, just being on a downswing, I really got to the point in this session where I literally was like, this is going to take every ounce of strength that I have to get through this and not just burn through the rest of my bankroll and, have this be a kind of ruinous event. This is going to take every ounce of strength that I have. And recognizing that at the time and then moving forward was actually incredibly powerful and really helpful. And it didn't yield immediate positive results, but it has yielded positive results since that happened. So I think those are kind of just my some thoughts on that.
Yeah, because variance doesn't last forever. And if we can survive like the storm and still have a ship left when the sun comes up the next day, then we can stay afloat. Whereas if we've destroyed the ship in the storm, if we let ourselves be destroyed, then it doesn't matter that the storm stopped. We're already done for. So it's this idea that like when life or poker or whatever throws like a shitstorm at you, which is what happened to me in life last summer, or what happened to you in poker last weekend, and we will go through more of these in both life and poker. Everyone will, the audience will as well. The question is like, can you muster the resilience to survive the bad times so that you can thrive in the good ones? Because you've thrived this weekend. You told me before we started recording that you had a really great session where you won a ton of money, in your own words, and that may not have been possible had you capitulated last weekend. When you were in the eye of the storm, right? Last weekend, you were faced with, the Leviathan, and you had to withstand it. And having withstood it passes, because everything passes, right? All of the bad variance generally passes in one form or another, and there's a chance to do something good. So that's the thing to remember when we're running really badly, is that this will end, and when it does, you want to have lost as little as possible so that you can be higher up in the poker food chain than that other reg, we put it in like brutal terms, who didn't keep it together and capitulated, and when he then ran good, he'd lost 68 buy-ins instead of our 34. And by only losing 34, we then hit a 50 buy-in upswing, and we were up 16 buy-ins because he was down 68 in the storm. He's still down 18 and we were up 16. That's the difference between a good few months and a bad few months in live poker, right? Or in a good few weeks or bad few weeks, or whatever your time frame is. So maybe the other thing that we can say constitutes a game, because this has evidently become the topic of today's podcast, is perspective, is understanding that there are storms and there are clear skies, and knowing which one you're in, and knowing that the overall progression isn't just a storm, it isn't just a clear sky, it's a series of storms. The sky changes from blue to grey to white to everything in between over the course of your poker career multiple times, many, many, many times. And if you can see that and sit back and almost see it as like a conveyor belt of good times and bad times going past you, all you can do is optimize yourself in every phase of that conveyor belt. And one day, 6 years from now, if you've kept it together during 7 downswings instead of capitulating 7 times, maybe at the end of the 6 years you are a few 100k better off, or 60k better off, or something like that. And that 100k or 60k could be a deposit on your massive house or your awesome car, or maybe something even more meaningful. Maybe that's money that you can just do something really good with in your life, or can invest or whatever. So yeah, this higher value thing that's available to us, if we can damage minimize. I don't really think about my A game. while running bad because I can't access it while I'm running bad. But if I could, it would be just utter damage minimization. It would be just like, I'm in a storm. This is what I do. I play my B game. That's the best I can do. Maybe I can't reach my A game, but I can play my B game. And maybe when we zoom out, that's an A game of itself. Being able to play your B game or B minus game or even C game in a storm and not your F or G or Z game. Maybe that's the final component, is that resilience and that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This is going to be out of sequence in our discussion, but one of the things that came to mind, and maybe this will be something we can kind of conclude on, but when you were talking about this, getting into that flow state and all of the distractions that kind of are constantly like competing for our attention and tearing us away, that's something that I'm like really aware of, and that has always been kind of on my mind ever since I, kind of got a smartphone and started using social media and all of that stuff. And I actually keep my social media use to like a minimum to the extent that I can, because I absolutely hate the feeling of like spending large amounts of time on social media. Like, I hate what it does to my brain. I hate what it does to my attention span, the fact that it smashes my attention span. I hate that it tears me away from what is beautiful in life and brings me into things that are ugly. I hate that it makes me worry about and deal with people who, prior to social media, I never knew they even existed.
Yeah.
Or how they thought about the world. I hate all of these things. And so I actively like fight this kind of modern sensibility of like always being on your phone and being pulled in a million directions with social media. And I feel like that's something that for me like is a real threat, because if it means I can't access that flow state, if it means that it's keeping me from being able to achieve like what I find to be kind of like the sublime in life, which is accessing that flow state or having that experience with a book or a piece of art or a piece of music or a poker game or a poker session, it actually makes me angry. It's like threatening my life. And so it's something that I'm like very conscious of and always aware of. And I think that when it comes to my, playing my A game, those temptations to be torn into other directions, to get drawn into other people's bullshit, to be torn apart is there. It may not be through social media on your phone. It could be if you're looking at your phone, but it could also be on things that people are talking about at the table. It could be like, something that happens in the room. It could be something that happens in the game or whatever. Like, being able to say no, like that's a threat to my A game. And I recognize that and I'm casting that out.
Yeah, definitely. Like a couple of weeks ago, when I don't know why I decided I was going to be more active on Twitter, like it's good for the business to do that and just like post about poker. With that come trolls, right? With extra exposure that happened a few weeks ago, there were a few more trolls than normal. And for some reason, my brain just got into this obsessive state where it was like, you should check your YouTube comments, you should check your Twitter. It's like, why am I like pandering to people I don't even know, like across the internet, that are saying nasty things out of nastiness? Normally I just ignore them, but like the more you look, it's almost like the more you look at the sun, the more your eyes get destroyed. The more you look into that abyss and take those trolls seriously, the worse it can get. And my final thing I want to say, then I do really need to go because I need to teach my student. If you listen to this student and I was late for this session, it's Melissa's fault. Obviously, you now have the proof. She's just like, yeah, that's how it is. So basically, I was going to say to the person, you know how we call out the trolls on this podcast sometimes, Melissa? The person that said I had an impoverished streaming den, for example, a few episodes ago. Well, this is to the person who left me a 7-point post early on a Sunday morning or Saturday morning on a YouTube video where I'd been coaching Jess on one of the Stalling to Mauling videos and had left 7 points saying, prefaced by the statement, I am a 500 NL player. I read that, I thought, oh God. Then there were 7 points and they were all like, you are wrong again. Once again, you're wrong. This is bullshit. This is actually the case. GTO Wizard does X with like 7 points. And this actually, like when I read this in the morning, I got up, it was my weekend and I thought, do I ignore this? Delete it? Or respond to it? These were the 3 options. I had a bit of time before my girlfriend woke up and before we were going to do anything, before the day really started. And I was like, I'm going to respond to it. And I'm going to like try to do it in a really measured way where I address the humanity of this individual. So I said, look, I don't think you've like malevolent intent here. And you've clearly meant to make a serious point because you spent ages on this post, evidently. So because you spent so much time on it, I'm going to respond. and I'm going to address every one of your points. And I did. And I defended about 6 of the points, maybe granted one of them. And I thought I'd done it in a really civil way. And I said, have a nice weekend. There you go. I've done that. And then the person deleted the comment. Later that day, the comment was gone. And therefore my reply was gone. And this wonderful exchange where objections were made and defenses were made in return, and the community was able to read it and learn from that. And also maybe like the best I've ever responded to another human being, like that's tried to troll me, is gone. So I say to this person, you told me have the balls to respond to your post, and then you've gone and deleted yours. What a shame. And to every other person out there that ever wants to troll or leave hateful comments, I will call you out. And we should start calling you out. You should have nowhere to hide, because on the internet you should act exactly as you should act in society. And I'm going to start calling these people out more and more, Melissa. This is totally off topic, but I think my A game of handling trolls is to be nice, respectful, and call them out on this bullshit that they can act in a way that they would never act in life. Within reason, obviously, if they're just toxic with no content, I'll ignore them or delete them. But when they're trying to make a valid point, that's the form I'm going to take. I know you want to come back on that. You can't, because I have to go teach my student. Sorry. Let's end it there. I think I have to. I'm going to get in trouble for my student. Okay. You can tell me your thoughts on that next time I speak to you, though, on the next podcast or whenever, because there's loads more we could say on this front. But I think we should have a segment about the person that most recently trolled me. This could be a real segment for you guys. This could be a good one. Good. All right, guys.
Let's do it.
You know what to do. If you like Poker Distilled, like it on YouTube, leave us a review on Spotify or iTunes, and we'll be back with more content very soon. Until then, play your A game. Bye for now.
Bye.